Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Can you all hear us?
Yes, Subhashini, we
Yes.
can.
Yeah, hi, Vincent. Nice to see you. Bharat, Balchandra, Biplab, Basav, and Ricardo. It's really nice to see all of you. And I think a few more people will join in. It's just 4 o'clock today. Before we go forward, I thought I would just introduce you to who Madhu is, as well as perhaps, just speak a bit on what we thought was the necessity for such a session. As you know, we at PexiScore have, we are into talent assessments and surveys and HR analytics. What we do is we want to build a culture of evidence-based management in human resources and people management functions. And in fact, Madhu is the first guest we have on this series that we generally do, and it's really nice that all of you have logged in to go on with this session on succession planning. I will a brief about Madhu. I'll just take you through it. Madhu is an accredited senior management professional with over 2 decades of experience in human resources, business partnerships, leadership development, succession planning, and so on and so forth. He does do a lot of coaching and mentoring for senior managers, and he has strengths in realigning work groups, driving CEO Center of Excellence initiatives, and fostering an environment of collective leadership towards transforming the company's culture. He's been on the board of directors for a lot of companies, and currently he is on the board of director for the Asian Arab Chamber of Commerce and Latin American Caribbean Federation of India. And he holds an MBA in HR, CIPD level 7, Marshall Goldsmith certified coach. He has a diploma in organizational development, as well as is a certified MBTI practitioner. In fact, I think the biggest thing that Madhu should be proud of is his book, which is titled Vikram and the Smiling Man, and it takes you through his journey as an entrepreneur. It's been widely appreciated by its readers, and I think it's something which you all might want to check up. He's very down to earth. He's going to be available for you to reach out to him at your convenience. With this, I'd like to hand it over to Madhu, who's going to take us through an introductory session on succession planning, the way organizations evolve. And I hope his next session in the near future would be on the advanced aspects of succession planning and how to implement the same. With this, I hand over the mic to Madhu.
Thank you, Subhashini. Thank you for having me today, both of you. It's good to see a lot of known names on the screen. I hope these are the same set of people I've been knowing for a while. Vincent, hi, Levin, Bala, Bharat, Basava, Biplab, Rupin, all of you. So Pavan, Sonal and Anupama, hi, hello. Thank you, Subhashini. You spoke so much about me. I'm not sure if it is all okay. To an extent, yeah, maybe. Let's. It's good to be connected, and also at the same time, it is good to speak to the knowledgeable HR audience as we have on this group now. Am I audible to all of you? Is the voice okay?
Yes, Madhu.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, good. So, how are you all doing in this? Should we say post-lockdown or still lockdown period? The COVID lockdown. How is it going? How are things with you personally and professionally both?
I'll just plug in the mic.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Is this okay? This is the mic. Okay, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. I've just been given the mic, so I just
Hi, Madhu. Good afternoon. Oh, sorry, good
I
evening,
can't hear
rather.
you completely, but yeah. Or should I have to plug in? Yeah. Sometimes too much of technology. You see. You said something, Vincent.
Yeah, I said hi, Madhu. Good evening.
Hi. Good evening. Good evening. Yeah.
So happy to hear your voice after a very long time and also see you live. Looking forward to hear more through this session.
Yeah. Nice. You know, nice of you have to have said that. Thank you. Uh, just quickly, I wanted to understand in terms of how things are happening with respect to the HR in your organizations, and are there any major challenges you are seeing? Because as a practitioner, and also when I speak to many of my colleagues, or even my some of the people who were part of my teams in the past, I hear a lot of them have concerns around the business continuity. The business continuity also comes from the fact that having a pipeline of leaders, right? Do we have the right kind of leaders at all in first place or not? So are you also facing anything like that? Any of you on the call, do you also have a similar problem? Just quickly, if anybody wants to just say anything, feel free. Okay, since nobody spoke, I assume that there are no problems and everything is hunky dory everywhere. Is that what I can infer out of it?
No, it's not like that, Madhu. Vincent here.
Yeah, Vincent.
See, there are challenges. I mean, definitely due to this situation we are facing, and being an NBFC,
True.
which has even lent out in the market, and now facing the challenges about repayment. And also now the future is not going to be very smooth, at least for a few months, because we cannot immediately start lending also, because we have to wait. Okay, because though the money is needed, but still the lending cannot happen, and most of the customers would have taken moratorium, and all these banks are deciding to wait for some time. So definitely there are challenges, but there is also positive feeling that this is the time that lot of things to learn. And personally, we being from the L&D background, we are utilizing this team to equip our team. Okay, the upskilling idea, what we conceived, is still working. We are doing much more trainings compared to the days, uh, the previous days, due to previous days of lockdown. So, but we also are thinking like what kind of situations would be there. Okay, well, because definitely it is a very challenging time for the HR team. So we are also trying to understand what's going on in the market, what's going on around us. So that is one of the reasons why we are participating in today's session, to understand from experts like you.
Good. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, see, this is something which I've been talking to a lot of people, as I said, and they have been seeing a lot of challenges, especially due to the this COVID thing. There are some companies who have lost some of their executives. Okay. So that is also something which I've heard, and I've also had to speak to one of the company in the Middle East, where as recently as 2 days back, something not so nice happened to one of the very senior gentlemen who I personally knew of. So I had to give some kind of inputs in terms of how somebody who is in his team could be taken to that level. Okay. So this can happen anywhere and anytime. Succession is not just about for what is happening currently. It has always been there as a pipeline builder for the leadership capabilities. So I think these are the times when the impact, or the importance of succession management, I won't use the word planning, but management as a whole plays a very vital role. And we as an HR, the professionals, especially the L&D people, L&D team, or even the talent management team, or HR in general, we play a very significant role. I've been involved in the succession for last 8, 9, 10 years, close to, in various companies, in my capacity as somebody leading the HR function, or somebody who is consulting with the clients. So I've seen a varied the spectrum of the way the succession has progressed. And it also brought me to thinking as to why the succession should only be limited to a certain role or certain the hierarchy in the organization, and why it cannot be for everybody. So today, let us speak as a precursor to and probably the detailed discussion about succession in days to come, as to what this succession is and how this happens. I'm sure many of you being on the call here have done this in different shapes and forms in your careers at this point in time. Let me just also bring that out and also understand from you as to what exactly it is. See, I've always been telling a lot of my people, and also in my previous sessions, that the more you send me questions on the screen or even ask me um, just by raising your hand, it would be appropriate so that I can share more, and rather than just continuously speaking, that is something which doesn't come very naturally to me. So that's one part of it. The other part is also I wanted to have this more interactive so that everybody in the call gets to hear from others in terms of what are the good things they're doing and what can be improved. Okay? So that is the premise with which we will start this whole conversation. You can use the group chat window you have on the screen. You can always type in there. I would respond to it as well as you can ask questions. Fine. So should we start then? Okay. Let me share the screen. I can share this. Okay, can you all see?
Yes, Madhu.
Yes,
Okay.
Madhu.
I'm just trying to give me a minute, sorry, second. Just getting the technical things sorted out. Okay. Sorry, I'm a little clumsy today, so just bear with me. Okay. This has been something which I've noticed over a period of time is usually when you speak about succession planning or succession management, the first thing what some of the senior audience in the team talk to you is it about replacement, or is it about just if somebody is not there, what should I do? How should I replace that with somebody? So my way of explaining to people, and I'm sure some of you on the call also would be doing it, is succession planning is not just about replacing somebody. It could be if a CEO, CFO, CHRO is not there, you bring somebody, or you identify somebody and you replace. Yes, to an extent it is, but it is also something to do with comprehensive employee development. So this whole succession management as a process, I would always say that it is a comprehensive employee development. It starts right from probably the first line manager, all the way up to the CEO on the board. So that is where this model, which almost some 6-8 years ago, me and a colleague of mine, we both came up with, which is called SPD model, succession, progression, and development, because we didn't want the succession to just look like a replacement process. So we came up with this model, and I'll probably take you through in the next few slides as to what this model is. What actually worries me when I look at some of these numbers is less than 1/3 of the population across the board have taken succession seriously. Not just in India, across the world, I see this. Only 23% of the people, as you see, it's not me, the Gartner says so. 23% of the business units have leaders what they want, which also means that 77% of the business don't have the leaders what they want, which also reflects back on, did we have the right assessment in first place for leadership, or did we have the right people in first place? The succession is one model where you can probably identify the right leaders for a longer period of time. Also, what gives me little uncomfortable feeling is also fact that 37% of the CEOs globally don't believe that succession is an important task. Okay, this was probably before the COVID thing happened. The study has not happened after that. So I'm sure now, if you see, there may be much more than 37% people who would feel that it is required. But at the same time, it is also something which has always been seen as one of those chores the HR team would end up doing. It's not. It has to be much more than just an annual exercise or a biannual exercise where you tick the box saying that, okay, who is the person, who is the person. So this is much beyond that. Okay, the scope of activities is much, much beyond that. So let's see in the next few slides as what this is, right?
You can see this thing.
Okay, sorry. Have you been asked this question in the past, any of you, and have you got this as an answer from any of your CEOs or the top executives? Any of you have had an experience of this in the past? I can only tell you many times. As recently as 2-3 months ago, I still had one of my very senior audience coming to me and telling, no, what do you expect from this? And then I get to hear saying that, yes, I don't want to hear any surprises. This is an underlying belief that every CEOs always have is, I don't want to hear any surprises when somebody leaves the organization that I don't have the ready successor or somebody who could take on the position. So this has always been the case, and we always have this the conversation which keeps having quite often saying that how we can reduce this. Okay, some of you said Mohan, you said yes, it is true, and yeah, Murugan said no, so yeah, that's okay. But pretty much globally, if you see, and all the top executives, CEOs, or the chairmen of the board and the MDs of the organization, they don't want to have any surprises. And it is prudent and imperative on the part of the HR team to ensure that we have this continuous pipeline created. And succession plays an important role in that. So let's look at it. As I was talking to you, let me talk to you about the SPD model and how did we come about this model. This was almost 10, 12 years ago. A colleague of mine and we both were discussing about a succession. This was during those 2008-2009 financial meltdown, and also there was this Katrina, the hurricane which had hit the world, especially in the US and that part. The organization which I was working for had big presence in US, and many of the senior managers or senior executives, for some reason or the other, were not probably willing to work, or how things were not all hunky-dory, I would say that. That is when we started looking at as to how do we ensure we create a bench which not only looks at the short term, which let's say 6 months, maybe 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, and how does that make sense in the whole the organization pipeline building, in the succession pipeline building. I said not all of the people who would be identified would be successors. So let's assume if there is a CHRO and there is a young, bright manager who is 3 or 4 levels below the CHRO. However, we know that for the fact that in the next 5-8 years, the guy can even eventually take the position of a CHRO. But that guy cannot be in the part of the succession pool at the very beginning. So how do you create something which is more substantial and more elaborative, so in order to help the organization absorb this whole succession as a process? So that is when we came about something called SPD as a model. This SPD as a model talks about succession, progression, and development. What does that mean and how does that relate to the overall? Let us look at it. If you see succession as an overall thing, Yeah, I'm just reading what Mohan you said. You said unless an organization looks at building human capital as part of its growth planning, succession planning will always end up being a surprise. Uh, ha, ha, ha. All that I want to say is what we spoke a while ago is so true. You're absolutely right, Mohan. That brings back to the same conversation which you see on your screen. Is many a times organization just look at replacement planning as a succession. Yes, replacement is also a kind of succession, but it's at a very, very basic level. You just identify successors sometimes as a stopgap till somebody takes over the position. You identify a successor, and then the person comes along. You just move along. So that is at a very basic level. And at this medium, or I would say at a mid level, is where succession planning is about. And this is where you identify not only the successor, but you also ensure that you have some kind of a development for those successors as to how they should do, what they should do, eventually to take over the position. And this can be at a certain levels only, maybe let's say in a mid managerial level or at a senior level. Most organizations prefer to have this kind of succession planning. And I won't say it is not right. I would say this is also very important element. Organization which look at a long-term planning, long-term vision, who happens to see the future and also happens to have a kind of a retention plan. They look at succession as an overall management. What does that mean? Here you don't not just identify the successor, you not only develop them, but you also include as many layers of the organizations as possible in your succession framework. Uh, Typically, when you do the succession, I'm sure some of you who have been doing this in different shapes and forms would have done it at a replacement. You have somebody who's important in the organization. You find who should be the person if the person leaves. That is pretty much good. Yeah, I mean, looking at the complexity of the organization, that I would say, yeah, it would be wonderful. Some organization might go to the next level of succession planning, and they might identify successors at a certain level, maybe at mid managerial level or at the senior level, and develop some of them. Okay. So if you ask me, I would always look at succession and the leadership as interconnected at across all levels in a very coherent manner. You cannot have succession alone, or you cannot have leadership development alone. They always go hand in hand. How do you bridge the gap and how do you take it to the next level is what makes or breaks the L&D organization or a talent management organization. At this point in time, I just want to give 5 or 10 seconds gap and see if any of you want to share anything or ask me anything. Please feel free to do so. If you want, you can even speak up, not just typing. You can even speak up. I'll just, for 10 seconds, I'll just keep. Okay.
Madhu, Mohan here, sorry.
Yeah, Mohan.
Okay, so when we're talking of succession planning, can we safely say that when we drop an organogram, and even if it is a replacement that we are getting it, or we are putting in people into specific positions in the organogram, the ideal way of looking at succession planning would be at the recruitment level itself. We must get the right person to fit the position, whether it is a complementary or supplementary role, so that you know that this person is somebody who has agreeableness with respect to development, and he is a resource who will be on the long run somebody fit to take on the succession ladder in the organization. So yes, when we recruit itself, that should be in plan, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely, Mohan. And it also depends on the maturity level of the organization. How the organization has matured over a period of time in ensuring their competency framework is interwoven into their job description framework, which will eventually tell you how fit the candidate you are recruiting is for that particular position. Is this going to be a stopgap arrangement, or is this a long run arrangement? If you recollect those conversations which we have been having, and Vincent also, in terms of the competency framework, how that can be integrated. That is why I said it is a coherent, and it's a whole process in itself. I as an HR professional, I would be dreaming of a day when everything gets into one alignment, where you recruit the person knowing very well this guy could be in another 8 years or 10 years time, could be somebody who could take on the business leader's role. That would be an ideal day which I would be dreaming of. And it's not difficult, let me tell you honestly. And I have done this with a couple of organizations, one where I worked and one where I consulted. Quite extensively, we have had this, the conversations in terms of how do we do the competency-based, recruitment, or competency-based the HR practices. It's quite possible. Once you have the competency framework, whatever you just mentioned, it's all easy, or I would say it is more objective way of doing it, and it becomes much more easier.
I couldn't agree with you more with respect to the maturity, because let's look at it this way. I mean, honestly, every organization really works because of its machinery, which is people.
Absolutely.
And irrespective of what sort of a business plan you have,
Yeah.
unless you have the competent people who are able to run that machine towards achieving those goals, it's not going to be worth it. So more than looking at it as something, it's not utopian, or it is not something desirable. It's actually the thing that they should look at, because otherwise it's not, you're not building an institution, you're not looking at the long run. Rather, you're looking at just firefighting and stopgap arrangements.
Indeed.
That is, yeah. So just my thoughts. Sorry.
Yeah, man, please, you're one of those senior guys in the organization. I have seen it enough, and I really appreciate what you just mentioned, and it really helps the team here, on the conversation.
Thanks, Madhu. Please. Yeah.
Anybody else? Anything before I move on? How could we perceive APD, whether employee perspective or employer perspective, or both? Murugan, if you don't mind, what is APD? I mean, sometimes I get really stuck with these acronyms. Or did you mean SPD? Okay. See, SPD as a process, it's not just employee perspective, it is also from an employer's perspective, and I would say it is from both angle, as Mohan just talked about. It is also very important for the organization to have somebody going through this progression, which is like DPS. Basically it is development, progression, and then move to the succession if somebody is there for a long-term perspective. At the same time, it is not that everybody has to go through all three levels all the time. You could bring in somebody at the S level, or you could bring in somebody at the P level or D level, and then have the journey there from somebody from mid-managerial to the senior managerial. It works in different various permutations and combinations, Murugan. And also that there is nothing hard and fast rule that somebody has to come from this position only to move to this position. Some of you, I'm sure, may have even heard of TAS, Tata Administrative Service, where Tata developed their own internal pool of leaders who could eventually take on different Tata senior management roles. Something very similar to IAS, right? What we have in country. Tatas have their own internal administrative service thing, which I feel is more of a leadership practice. Even GE had this practice where GE would have their own pool of trainers, the leaders who would eventually take on different GE businesses. I worked for Toyota Middle East a while ago, which is where we also created something like that. I created a pool of leaders using the same SPD model, where they could take on different Toyota businesses across all the the distributors business across Middle East. So there is no hard and fast rule as to this has to happen in this order, and the perspective is from both sides. Okay. So hope I have answered your question. Yeah. So let's move on to the slide part now, where I would spend more time talking more about the SPD as a model, because that is where I feel most of us not able to link between the development to the progression to the success, while we do it independently. So I mean, I always tell there should be a method to the madness, and this is some method we have got into the madness. Yeah. Here. So how do you see, probably Murugan, this answers your question even more detailed. How do I see it as an SPD as a model, and how I've so far used it in various organizations? Is succession for me is something to do with medium to short term plan, ideally at senior level, but at selected mid levels. When I say selected mid levels, I would try to see to that, these are critical to the organization success. These are those roles. Usually you say, no, the CEOs will not be able to sleep if the roles are not filled. These are those kind of roles where, this is a must, a succession which has got every element of it. Succession management element, as I said, identifying the successor, ensuring there is a development plan for them, and ensuring that they are following through that. Progression is more in terms of a long to medium term plan at mid levels and select junior levels. Again, select junior levels means something to do with the critical roles within the organization. For me, development is more in terms of a long to medium term plan at junior levels, which is the frontline managers who could eventually take on the next level. One of the organizations before I left Middle East, I'll also talk about this in my case studies conversation towards the end of it. We did this exercise, especially at the development stage. The first, when I started implementing, it was at the succession level, and then we came to the progression. And by the time I left them 4 years back, 4 years after being there for 4 years, we had created something around the development phase. I'll talk to you about that in a bit now. As I said, this was a model which was co-created by me and another colleague of mine for an organization, and then we decided to take it to different places because this had a lot of meaning to us. At the same time, this also brings to a kind of conversation, people keep on asking me at different times, I've noticed, is what kind of a successor you need to bring in at a level, be it at a VP level or an SVP level or a CEO level. Should you replace people or should you clone somebody? Okay, this is a kind of question I always get to hear. Let's assume if there is a Jack Welch, should you replace a Jack Welch with a Jack Welch, or a Jeff Imlet will do, or a Larry Boosidy would have done it? Okay, that would keep continuing. So my take on this has always been like, at what level the organization is. Is the organization at a growth level? Is the organization at a, the kind of a maturity level where everything is going fine, you need somebody who could just maintain the status quo? Or is the organization at a transformation level? Like, for example, if an organization is, let's assume, is Bangalore based or South India based, does it have to go to the next level? If it has to go to the next level, does the management team or the mid manager or senior manager or a CEO has a vision to take it to the next level? It could be no. The answer could be yes or no. If the answer is yes, good. If the answer is no, how do you probably bring in somebody when the CEO is leaving, or when you want the CEO to leave, that has a long-term vision, the transformation vision, and not somebody who is your existing CEO's clone. That also play clone, sorry, not clone. So it could mean different, right? So so I didn't want to sound that way. Yeah. So the succession also should be made in such a way that keeping in mind at what level the organization is, especially at the senior level, that plays a significant role. In one of my case studies towards the end, I'll talk about how we had to look at a CEO or a VP of operations, basically somebody who's a COO kind of a role, who would would not look beyond, and how I had to talk to him to have a golden handshake and bring somebody else. Let's look at it. Okay, so this is in nutshell as to how the succession or the SPD model works and how it should be implemented in the organization. So what I also want the learned HR professionals on the call, as well as others who are in this call, to ask these 5 questions before we start the succession process. And this 5 questions is not just for succession, but it is for any of our talent activities, right? It is to do with, why does my business even exist in first place? Why does this company exist? It could be somebody, the NBFC which I was part of, their whole presence was only to ensure there is a social impact. So if that is the case, do we have leaders doing it? If you don't have it, how do we bring it? So that is where the assessment of leaders also plays a significant role. At some point in time, I'll ask Ruben to pitch in here and talk about some of these assessments which can probably help them to identify as an organization, and also to identify what is the key purpose of this whole the process of succession you want to look at, and what is the value differentiator as an organization you want to bring in. By doing it, who are you impacting? Could be internal or it could be external, anybody, but that is what you need to identify. And what is the legacy you want to leave behind by doing this exercise? Many a times we look at it saying, yeah, we did this exercise, we had to do it, rather than some internal auditor will come and ask me, have I done it or not? Okay, so I have to tick the box. So it's more than that, what kind of legacy you want to leave, and how do you, link it back to the overall organization. I always talk about these 5 P's of succession management, as to what these are and how do they link it back to the questions we saw in the last slide, right? What is the purpose of doing the succession? This is some kind of a conversation maybe you need to have with your senior management team, and some of you who are heads of HRs here, you might want to talk to the CEO and to figure out what is the purpose of this whole exercise for a particular role or for the whole organization. What are our priorities in terms of, is the priority to maintain what we are doing, sustenance, or is it the growth path, or is it, going down? If it is going down, what kind of leaders you need to have? Empathy, the leaders who show empathy, or people who have no empathy. How do I do that? These kind of priorities. Once you do that, what kind of preparedness, as an organization, what are the things you have? What tools you have? Do you have assessment tools? Do you have, the matrix? Do you have the basic HR analytics, which should help you to identify the right kind of successors? If you have the competency framework, job descriptions, to ensure that you do the right amount of preparedness or the preparations before you start the process. The other P I would always look at is the probabilities. What are the probabilities of doing this exercise right or not doing this exercise right? And what are the probabilities of having people? There could be a case scenario I will talk about. Probably I'll add probabilities and possibilities. The probabilities and possibilities go hand in hand. What are the possibilities of having a successor, not having a successor? When you don't have a successor, I'll give you an example. I was talking to one of the business leader who has been, heading the function for 8 to 12 years, 8 years plus, and somebody who is seen as a visionary leader in his domain. When I sat with him for a succession, the first question I asked is, okay, so you've been in this position for all these years, and with 20 years of experience, with a doctorate in the technology which the organization was looking for, who do you think are ready to take your position when you retire? To my surprise, this is biggest surprise I had during the conversation. He says, nobody. What do you mean, nobody? At least there are so many in your team, 8 to 12 senior managers, are you saying that nobody's ready to take your position if and when it is vacant, or you don't see anybody? He says, no, nobody. So it was a kind of awkward conversation to begin with, and then over a lot of the digging deep into what was the conversation was all about. So then when I realized that the person had not spent enough time building anybody in the team who could eventually take on the position. So the possibility of either building somebody or buying, the question between building and buying was a bigger challenge there. The possibilities were only two: either you build the person from internally or you buy it from the external market, right? So these are the two possibilities. And before you start this whole exercise, or when you start this whole exercise, you need to probably ask this question very frequently with your senior audience as to, should we build it or should we buy it? I mean, both are not wrong or both are not right. At different points in times, both make a lot of sense. There could be a scenario where building somebody might takes much longer than maintaining the business. So that is when you might even have to look outside to build or buy somebody. Buy in the sense hiring somebody, right? That is something which one has to look, and that is what I look at as a probabilities and possibilities. That is what could happen in an organization. Again, at this point in time, I just want to briefly stop and ask any of you if you have anything to share or ask me as questions, please feel free to do so. Any questions or anything you want to ask me, feel free to do that.
So regarding this, hello.
Yeah, Murugan, go on.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, sir. Regarding this building or buying, so if suppose if you build a person who is not that worthy or ethical, and you are building, you are spending a lot of time, after a particular time is leaving.
Okay.
So how could you see this situation? And also the other perspective, you are hiring a new person, so you don't believe, you're always you started building, but that doesn't work. Then you go for a new person, you are buying a person. So you are searching for many people, you are selecting a particular person. That person is also not expecting or not fulfilling your expectation.
True.
This situation, so how could we overcome or manage?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very practical question.
Yes.
The answer to this is, I've always been telling all my team members and also the organization, is recruitment or succession is always like a arranged marriage. It works both ways. You might succeed or you might not succeed, right? How do you succeed is only by adjusting and understanding and knowing more. And how will you not succeed is by fighting, or just ignoring, or egos. That is where it comes into picture. In both cases, as Murugan, you just said that even when you're building, the person leave. Yeah, man, everybody leaves, right? Nobody is going to stick in one place for too long. That is always going to be the case. That is why you don't build one individual. You at least build 2-3 people. That is what succession is all about. You have somebody called R1 ready now, R2 ready in a few months' time, R3 ready in 1 or 2 years or 5 years' time. So you build your pipeline based on that. Also, when you buy, that is where I always talk to people, saying that assessments plays a big role. And assessment, by it doesn't necessarily give you 100% accurate, but at least it will give you some kind of an inferences on people. And that is where the leadership assessment or even recruitment assessment, as we all look at various points in times, right? These gives you a picture, or this gives you an input in terms of what and how you should be going about doing it. Okay, as Mohan mentions, yes, it has to start right at the recruitment stage. That is very important. That is for sure. Yeah, I mean, to answer your question, Murugan, yeah, I mean, it works both ways. You build somebody, they might leave, and you hire somebody, they might not fit in. It works both ways. That is where the robustness of the system, the maturity of the systems comes into picture. The first time when you're doing, you might not get it right, but that doesn't mean that you have everything is wrong. You have to sustain over a period of time, and only then you can say that, okay, this is going to be something which works for me or which doesn't work for me. When I say we, the organization as a whole. So I hope I answered your question.
Just in the same point, Madhu, it's a conundrum, right? I mean, it all depends on again the maturity level the organization is in,
Yeah.
and the sort of outlook or the cultural outlook it has with respect to, again, I somehow it's my pet peeve, the human capital development. When you look at it from that perspective, unless the outlook is to build an institution and ensure that your human resources are your human capital, if the cultural outlook of any entity is not that, it is difficult to actually even look at those probabilities. Actually, it doesn't even come to the third, fourth, and fifth. If honestly, you look at it from your cultural perspective as it is human capital and it is for the long run.
Indeed.
So then, it is just your priorities and your this thing that comes into play. You need not even worry about the probabilities and possibilities, because you have a clear vision, you have a clear path, you have a clear understanding of this is how we work. And because we work like this, we're going to get these type of individuals only at the lower stage itself.
True.
So at some point of time, you have, say for example, 20 years in the past, an organization would have had the initial stages when it joined, when it started. And then afterwards, because the cultural outlook is to have an organization which is looking to the future with the human capital that is there. So they've always grown, unless honestly you have an exit as a consequence of very extreme circumstances. Tata is a clear example. I've always seen somebody joins the Tata, he's a Tata for his life.
The rest of his life.
And they're not great paymasters, but the ethos that exists within the organization is such that they have complete faith in the organization. There's no trust issue. So when you have something like that, that is a culture which pervades across the organization.
Indeed, indeed. You're absolutely bang on, Mohan, on that. That is precisely why I would always say that, the maturity of the organization and the kind of the tool they, as an organization, you use for various assessments and the way you build your competency framework, that is what it it makes all the difference. That is what you will see in this slide of mine, which is in the nutshell in terms of what this succession is all about, right? To start with the process of succession, the incumbent's feedback or the inputs from the incumbent makes a lot of difference. Let's say, for example, Mohan, if we are doing succession for your team or for you, your role, and if you identify 2 of your people who are your successors, when I come and sit with you, I speak about those 2 individuals to you, and then you give me a feedback saying that, okay, this person can do this bit of what I do, and this person can do this bit of what I do. There is that kind of feedback always plays a very significant role in identifying the right successor. But mind you, that is not the only kind of input, and that input is only a qualitative input I should be looking at. For me, what is more important is the job description of the incumbent role. Let's say, for example, if I'm doing succession for the chief internal auditor role, and then I go to Mohan and ask him for his job description, or from an HR, we take the job description of the chief internal auditor and then map it to see how many within the team are fitting into that. And how do we do it? Is through having a proper competency framework. Let's say, for example, to do a job of a chief internal auditor, one of the most important job skill is investigation skills, right? Or something to do probing skills. Let's take it that way. And we have identified 2 people. Let's say on the call, I see Vincent and let's say Sampath. Both of them have different skill sets. When I sit with Mohan, I ask Mohan, do you see Vincent, and between Sampath and Vincent, who has the probing skills, better probing skills? You might give on a scale of 1 to 5, 3 to Vincent, 4 to Sampath. So then that rating, whatever has been given by the incumbent, will have to be scientifically validated through a job readiness or a leadership readiness assessment. Okay. And this assessment can be in terms of what competencies you have, and do the person or the person who Mohan has identified or the system has identified fits into that role particularly or not. Maybe at this point in time, let me bring in Ruben, and probably you might want to share, what kind of readiness assessment or leadership assessment you guys can help the companies with.
Sure, Madhu. So, yeah, at Cisco, we do have a lot of assessments. And here, I would say that one of the biggest importance, which even we discussed, was one is building the meaningfulness, understanding the meaningfulness of the job role. And second part is, of course, understanding the leadership frameworks. So, which means how good a manager is the person, and then how good a leader is the person. And in this aspect, there are, of course, there would be certain competencies which are fixed across for all kind of leaderships, and there could be certain variable components which could be, say, for example, what kind of a role differentiation is the new person coming in to make. So again, giving the Tata's example, so when Cyrus Mistry joined in, his role was more about continuation rather than building, because Ratan Tata had already built it for the next 30 years. So measuring these aspects, uh, yeah, Vincent, sorry, it's echoing because we are both in the same place. So thanks for pointing out. Uh, so what happens is that so what we do typically is that we sit with actually the HR team, the senior management team. We try to figure out what are the required competencies, as Madhu rightly pointed out, finding out what are the inputs required to be measured, and which out of which certain could be subjective, certain could be objective, uh, and finding them out and then measuring them through a very scaled methodology. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank
No.
you. Unmute. Oh. Yeah, thank you, Ruben. I think what you just talked about is very important in terms of the assessment. Yes, Biplab, as you said, the 9 box, that is what I'm talking about in a 3x3 matrix. So once you have the assessment scores and also the inputs from the incumbent, what you do next is about plotting them on 3x3 matrix. If you recollect, we had spoken about it a while ago, during one of our conversations, as based on the performance and the potential matrix, you fit all these candidates. For example, for a particular role, you might have 4 or 5 different successors who are identified, and when they go through the leadership assessment, you might only have 3 people, and of the 3 people, if you plot them on a 3x3 matrix, you might end up having only one as your ready now successor, and the other 2 can be somebody who could be developed over a period of time. That also comes from your assessment, where you have the individual development plan. You want to add something?
I was saying, if they want, we can forward to them a leadership sample assessment.
Yeah, I mean, that would be wonderful. Maybe you can share. Subhashni just said that if you want, she can send some leadership assessment sample report, which all of you can have a look at, and also can see how this can be related back. Yeah, I mean, see, it's very important, as I said. 3x3 matrix makes sense, and then once you have the 3x3 matrix, it is also a kind of a long-term process for me, is to identify the IDPs for these people. IDPs can also come from the assessment directly, so it solves half of your problem there. You don't have to do it, right? So once the IDPs are shortlisted, as this is where the role of the talent management, or in many companies, as I see, L&D comes into picture, where you facilitate this whole process. The process of identifying the successors, letting them through the leadership assessment, and then coming up with the 9 box, and from there to IDP. Once the IDP is identified, how do you ensure that they go through the process of the development? Okay, so once that happens, the panel discussion. See, I mean, I'm just taking you through in brief about all of these things. In my next session, maybe I'll spend my whole session only on this particular slide, which talks about how do you identify the, how do you take the input. I have a lot of those, formats and other things. And then probably we spent whole day probably, or the whole 1 hour just around this one particular slide. So once the IDPs is identified, I've always believed in this 3E model. 3E model is about experience, the exposure and the education. How an individual can be developed using this 3Es. Most of the time for me, the successor can be developed only on the job training, which is more like an experience. The more you experience you give, the more exposure you give to the individual, the more the confidence and the readiness improves. After that, giving them a certification here and there, or helping them with some kind of a leadership program or something, that doesn't make any difference, or it makes very less difference, let me say so. Otherwise my bread and butter is gone, right, if I say no leadership. So yeah, I mean, see, most importantly, the last piece of it is the panel discussion. This is something which I used to do it for leadership, the very senior level, like CEO and his successors, and one level below CEO, is where you have a panel of all the other people, like a CEO, his peers, or the people who report to him, or the first hand, the senior team, and then do this succession. Let's say, for example, between me, Vincent, Mohan, and Ruben and Subhashni, we are five senior people. We all sit and we'll be discussing only about my successors. Okay, and we will take inputs from somebody like a Subhashni or a Ruben or a Sampath or a Vincent or Ravi on the call. I see a lot of these names as to why the person should be my successor or not. Okay. So that gives a holistic picture, and that also gives the credibility for the whole the process of what we are doing. This is something I used to do it at a very senior level audience. And in my next slide, when I talk about the case studies, that is where I probably will be able to give more understanding of the panel discussion which I'm talking about. Okay. I hope so far so good. In the interest of time, and also the 3 case studies which are very close to my heart, I just want to spend some time, just to talk about how I did what I did with these places. One of the first and foremost which comes to my mind is one of the very big software company where I worked long time back, where we had to identify successes, right? I was not directly involved in the whole process, but I was watching it from an outside, person purview as to what was happening when this company went through a transformation, where the organization, the chairman decided to have a dual CEO role, where somebody had to be identified. How did the whole process of identifying the dual CEO happen? And if you happen to recollect some bit of it, I mean, what comes to my mind is when the organization decided to move from one CEO to the 2 CEO model, the transition was so smooth. I was continuously speaking to the head of HR and the VP of different business units, a couple of them. The whole transition was so seamless. With people did not even realize that the company has moved from 1 to 2 CEOs, where the decisions, all the apprehensions in the media about who will take decision, what will happen, what happens if this guy says yes, the other guy doesn't say yes. Nothing of that sort happened within 24 hours of the people taking charge. Okay? And why did this happen is because of the complete structured way of doing the succession. These 2 gentlemen were identified almost 5 years before they eventually took on the position, and they were given such an stretch assignments at time, and exposure and experience in leading different businesses within the organization, because that's a big conglomerate of sorts which had multiple business units. But when they took on the role, nobody could even sense that there has been a change. So for me, this has always been a biggest case study when it comes to the succession, when it comes to the seamless integration of successors within the organization. I can also tell you from the same organization, when I was still part of the organization in the HR team, at one point in time, because the organization has a zero 0% tolerance towards corruption. At one business unit in one particular region of the organization, there was some kind of the corruption issues which erupted long time back. Through internal audit, it was found. Believe you me, this probably happened at 3 in the afternoon. By 6, the whole regional senior management team was disbanded. Everybody was asked to leave, including the head of HR of the divisional head of the HR was asked to leave. Within 24 hours or less than that, business was running as usual. Because at every level, the organization had identified the successor, right from the divisional head, the sales head, the marketing head, finance head, HR head, and one more, I can't remember who the 6th one was. All 6 were asked to leave. At 6 by 3 o'clock it was asked. At 6 o'clock they had to leave. Next day when 8:30 morning, everything was normal. That's the kind of readiness, and that's the kind of the succession pool the organization had built in. So that always remains, in my mind, as fresh as it was yesterday. And the second one is the organization where I personally had to set it up, the succession process. This is Saudi Telecom company in Saudi Arabia, which is the single largest telecom provider and operator in the country. The first conversation I remember very well with the CEO of the company, where I had to go and have a detailed discussion as to what the succession should look like, the purpose of the whole succession management team, which I wanted to have. So I went and spoke to the individual. He said, the organization is going through the transformation, which in fact it was, and that is why somebody like me was hired in the role. And he says, for the next 3 years, I'm anyway going to be the CEO, and I'll be in charge of the transformation. But I want my successors, every year we used to identify their successors, to be somebody who can maintain the status quo. Okay? If and when it happens, somebody who can maintain the status quo. So we had to identify somebody like that. And as an organization at the senior level, what we also did was to identify at least 3 successors for each VP and the general manager, which is basically at the business leader level. Each one of them were identified as ready 1, which is like what we called as R1, and ready 2, which is R2, which is basically somebody whom you can groom in 6 to 12 months time, and R3, which is basically somebody whom you can groom in 2 to 3 years time. Each one of them were identified, and each one of them had a different different kind of assessment, and also different kind of the IDPs developed. And this organization also, let me tell you, spent enormous amount of time, doing a lot of, I agree, Vijay, your comment, middle management level, what are the key areas to focus during the transformation. Let me first finish what I'm talking, Vijay, and I'll come back to you on that. Okay. Also, probably I can relate from Saudi Telecom to the mid management thing what you're talking about. When we were doing it, again, as I said, the first important task for me was to identify somebody at the very top level. Once we identified the successor, the second or third year onwards, we were starting to identify the people at mid managerial level, which is basically at the director levels and the section managers, or basically these are the ones who are the layer above, below the business managers, but at the same time above the team lead level, those kind of people. So these guys, when we had to identify, what we also had to look at it is how soon these guys can step into the shoes of GMs, and who are the people below them who are basically the frontliners, and how soon these frontliners can come into their role. And the whole the idea of assessment was completely different. It was not just about the job description or the competencies. It was also about the ability to perform certain jobs. That became a part of the transformation process there. And towards the end, when I was leaving, what we were also looking at was to create the pool of successors for the junior management, which is more in terms of bringing the holisticity to the whole succession process. Probably we started from a replacement, we moved on to the succession planning, towards the end of my tenure, we were building the succession management as a whole. So that is what this company spent. And believe you me, we spent 4 years just building the process and just building the model, which today I can very proudly say can sustain for next 10-15 years at least. Okay. The last case study, which is a cement manufacturing organization at Oman, where I consulted for them, was something very similar to what one of you brought out, the transformation, the transition. As I said, the organization was ready to move beyond from Oman to other parts of the Middle East. The COO, the chief operating officer of the organization, that was his only job in life. He was in his mid-40s. Just after he finished his graduation, he got into the organization, and for 20 plus years, he just spent in that organization. For him, it was as big as anything else in his life. So he was very attached to the organization. The CEO was somebody who was a very benevolent kind of a guy, or kind of a coach, for his own team members. And I was coaching him and the organization at large. He wanted to go beyond Oman, and this guy was always like, no, why? We are doing good in Oman, and we should not be looking at, there are risks associated with it. It reached a point where the CEO had to summon me from Bangalore and say that, look, you know what, I think we have enough cash pile to go out of this comfort zone, and also the wherewithal, and the market is there, but this gentleman is becoming a roadblock to me. While I see him as my younger brother, but that is not helping business. What should I do? So I had to spend a lot of time, initially to try and see if this guy can be coached into it, which did not happen. So then we had to let go the individual. But during that process, I had to identify somebody. But within the organization, there was nobody. As this is the build case, right? There was nobody who could have built to take on his position. So then I had to buy somebody. So that is when we looked out and we helped identifying somebody, and bought the person, and then had to replace this individual. The person is still with the organization in a different capacity, but at the end of the day, he is not somebody now is in charge of the business. The whole the whole reason I put this as a case study here is also to see at various points in times in the organization, you need different kind of leaders, and to need this different kind of leaders, identifying this leadership pipeline, identifying what kind of successors you need to have in next 1 year, 2 year, or 3 years time period. There should be holisticity to the whole succession process. You cannot have it as a standalone. Okay, as an HR person, I have to do a tick in the box, so let me do it. That doesn't happen. That is why I just got these 3 different kind of the case studies. While I had many other case studies to speak about, I just got them here. Is there anything else? I'm just reading from the comments here. My apologies. Quickly, I have to leave as I have 5, 6 grade. Yeah, Mohan, go on. I'm just finished. My next slide would have been thank you. So that would have been the most important slide. You don't want to miss. Yeah. Anybody else? Any questions or any comments before I close? Because I've come to the end of this. But this is only a beginner. This is only a conversation initiator. There is so much more to talk about in the succession, especially in the current situation, what we are in the market, as a whole world is facing. Succession becomes a very, very important and critical tool for all of us. So I'll be more than happy to share as much knowledge as I can with all of you. Feel free, and I'll let Subhashni and Ruben take the call and let me know when we can do this. If there are any questions, I'll wait for 5 seconds. Otherwise, I'm done, and I can hand it over to one of you guys here.
Madhu, hi, this is Bala.
Yeah, Bala.
Just one general question. What happens generally in most of the sales organization, business continuity becomes the priority. So most of the time during the recruitment, filling up the position becomes, important, and then probably compromise in terms of the quality, or, may not be really having a stringent things in terms of culture match. Those things may not look at it. So we may hire people, and later when probably business have some issues or something, and then they start looking at wherever the candidate is, the employee is not really 100% fit. We may look at removing kind of a thing, or even people may actually not find comfortable in the environment to work in the company, and then they leave. So this becomes kind of a circle keeps happening.
Yeah.
So what would be a best solution? So would you think that the moment we get to know as an HR, we know that yes, it's not a 100% match. So can we look at providing required kind of a training and try to retain people? So linking to the succession planning, can we do something in this is what I wanted to understand.
I mean, yes, it is very, very possible, and that is what a matured organization will do. The competency framework plays a very vital role in identifying what kind of readiness you have in people. For example, what Mohan was talking a while ago, or even Vincent was talking about, where we said that identifying. Let's assume you have a competence, you have a job description, you have a particular competencies, and you have a particular competency score, and you hire somebody, and the person is at maybe 60th percentile or 70th percentile readiness level. You as an organization take a call at what percentile readiness level you hire somebody. You have a JD and you say that, okay, as an organization, as Kinara Capital, you want to hire somebody at 70% readiness level, and through the L&D programs, you will bring the person to 100% readiness in another 3 months to 1 year time period. That is possible. Yeah, you can do that. So to answer to your question, yes, as an organization, you will have to identify when you are hiring, or the whole recruitment process, because of the business pressure or no business pressure, you will have to identify what should be the acceptable readiness level within the organization. Once you identify that, then you build them, or you want to buy 100% or 80-90% ready people, you could go ahead and do that. So that is why I said the succession is not just a standalone process. Succession is a combination of various things within the HR fraternity or within the talent management framework. So you will have to probably have A plus B plus C, only then it becomes A plus B whole square or something. I'm not good at maths, something like that, right? You will have to identify that. So if you're looking at succession as a standalone, I would say that you will be failing in the whole process. So yeah, I mean, you might want to look building or buying. So both are acceptable. Did that make sense to you?
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Yep.
Got a clarity. Yep, thank you.
Yeah, Vijay, to answer to your question, in middle management level, what are the key areas to focus during the transformation? Do you want to be more specific, Vijay, in terms of what do you mean by what key areas? Are you
Madhu, good evening.
Good evening, Vijay. Go on.
So basically, I want to understand the succession planning. I see mostly from higher management level, but when it comes to a managerial or a senior manager level, so what is that they have to do during succession? I mean, what they have to do, what they have to transform to their whoever they have identified.
Mm-hmm.
It is basically the skill, the competencies, but what he has to focus. I mean, see, he doesn't have. For example, I don't have much time now. If I am leaving the organization, and I don't have much time now to, basically do a complete transition to the person who I have identified, because I have other work to do and I am busy. But I have to, focus on few things initially. That these has to be transferred at any cost.
Yeah,
I mean,
see, got it. Okay, I think you had asked me this during our initial conversations also at some point in time. Transforming is not the transition part I'm talking about. Transforming is right from the whole metamorphosis, the whole transforming. What should a middle management person should be doing is, it's not just about skill and competency. It is also about exposure, which we spoke about 3 E's, right? Exposures and experience. what kind of exposure the person has got to do the job, and what kind of experience has he got, what kind of stretched assignments he's been given as part of his development plan, what kind of the development activities he's supposed to be doing. That is where the leadership assessment plays a very vital role. Identifying what are the lacunas, or what are the development areas the one has to go through, and then link it back to his the development needs. What you asked me in the second part of your question is transitioning. When you hand it over to somebody, that's much easier. You jot down, create an Excel sheet, or create some conversational the chats, and then you finish it off. Transformation is much beyond that. Okay, so for me, to identify the transformation part, you need to first identify what are the lacunas or the areas of development. That can happen through an assessment. Once you have the details, then you link it back to the exposure part, or the education part, or the experience part. Okay. So it's a wider activity, not just limited to probably passing on from. Yeah, that is also important. That is also important. But at the same time, I would say transformation is much beyond that. Okay. Anything else?
Sure, Madhu.
Thank you. If you don't have any questions for which I have answers, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all of you for being on the call, and I really enjoyed this conversation. Yes, I have overshot it by 16 minutes. I'll try to be within the time next time. But this is a kind of topic where you keep speaking, and you don't stop it, right? And when it is close to heart, it is even more problematic to stop at a hard stop. Okay. Thank you very much, and hope to see you all soon. Have a good evening, all of you. Thank you. Bye-bye.